Hey Dave, how are you?
I'm good. I've read all the notes that people gave me after my last Blogging Heads, which apparently was almost inaudible. So I'm excited to talk and have people hear it. How have you? We should introduce ourselves, unless people gave up. Especially people gave up on me after that one. I am Dave Weigel. I write for Slate magazine about politics.
And I'm Bob Costa, and I write for National Review. About the same thing.
The same thing. I mean, there's not that much to say about it. We're going to try to stretch it out, I think.
Feel free to stretch it out. You got to read Dave's blog. That's good stuff. We also have a good blog at National Review, The Corner.
It's not bad.
It's really just politics, right, man?
Yeah, it's all that. And so we both also, instead of just opining about this, go on the road sometimes. I think you and I were both over the weekend, over Labor Day weekend. Instead of enjoying Labor Day weekend, you were enjoying the company of politicians. I was in New Hampshire, and you were you were where?
In South Carolina, Columbia.
I mean, it's the New Hampshire of the South.
That's right.
And I was basically there because I hadn't seen three candidates in this element. I really was just kind of following around the presidential candidates. I mean, I'll kick it off, I guess, describing what I did. So I went and saw John Huntsman do a couple of different types of events, because his strategy has been to just reestablish himself in New Hampshire, win every moderate in the state, carve out a moderate coalition, and somehow win the thing. Mm-hmm. I saw Sarah Palin speak to a Tea Party rally, and I saw Mitt Romney do a couple of different formats. Once to his very, very hyped speech to the Tea Party Express, which got the cover of the Boston Globe, the cover of the Boston Herald, the cover of the Union Leader, and then a much better attended breakfast he had the next day, where they bought pancakes and local syrup for about 400 Republicans. So I'm in both those formats. So I was kind of collecting those stories. What did you see?
I saw the Jim DeMint, Steve King, Robert George moderated debate/forum in Columbia, South Carolina. It was attended by Herman Cain, Michelle Bachmann, Mitt Romney, Newt Gingrich, and a few others. And it was a pretty decent forum. The big story coming out of that was who didn't show up. It was Rick Perry, governor of Texas, who's running. And that was a real disappointment due to the wildfires in Texas. Didn't get to see him in action. We're going to have to wait until tonight. But Dave, I'm really kind of curious about John Huntsman. I've never seen him in action on the trail. I saw you talked about Captain Beefheart with him. I mean, is this guy a joke candidate, or is he for real? What's his play there with independents in New Hampshire and what he's trying to do?
His play, which I described in the piece, and I actually had him and other strategists describe it. It is by far the most Rube Goldberg-esque of any plan to win the presidency, which is establish himself as a really credible Republican who also is more moderate than anyone else, just on boutique issues. And he's done this on global warming, originally on the stimulus. He's kind of filled out or stayed on the path he was in 2009 when he first was getting national interviews as the Republican who doesn't think Obama's inherently bad about everything, or Democrats are inherently bad about everything. He's going to take that and be the guy that voters, independent voters, are willing to cross off over an election day and vote for. And the theory, this is all a theory that John Weaver, his campaign manager, developed when he worked for John McCain. It actually worked in New Hampshire, and then it didn't work anywhere else. Michigan, it only works in states that you get independents crossover in. So Huntsman's strategy, and he's a very good retail politician, is just to show up everywhere, spend a decent amount of money on volunteers. I went to one Republican local picnic that I think by the end of it, half the people there of 80 had his T-shirts on. Show up everywhere and be everything to everyone. When it's pretty typical strategy, and he throws out little chestnuts that for the media to pick up, because I think he and Weaver understand very well how the media works. He also just strikes me in a way that some Republicans don't, as a guy who really likes the press and really likes answering questions from reporters. But there's a feedback loop there, because if he was Jim DeMint, it'd be one thing. Since he's conceding a lot of points that journalists make and stroking our egos, then he ends up listening to us a lot more. And so that was the main revelation I got. He didn't even try to go to the South Carolina thing. And I didn't get to hear the whole thing because I was covering, I think, Palin at the time, or no, I was covering Huntsman when it was happening. He was not there. But this was an actually fairly explicitly social conservative event, wasn't it? They actually got into gay marriage and things like that.
It was interesting. I sat next to Robert George on the plane ride down to Columbia, and he was very focused on getting the candidates to speak in a way that was more like a Charlie Rose interview about constitutional issues. Now, if you watch the debate in Columbia, you get the sense that maybe it was a little bit too much like a law school classroom, that Robert George maybe tried to thread too many things into the discussion that these candidates were not ready for, some law students wouldn't even be ready for. But I think overall, it was interesting to see just how they handled the format. I think Ron Paul was excellent because he's very good at talking and discussing his constitutional issues and liberty in a way that's more than just a soundbite. I think Newt Gingrich, interestingly, was probably the best in this format. As a former college professor, I think he got the most applause. He really wowed the audience if you were inside that room. This is a guy who knows how to hold that kind of audience and respond to those kind of questions. The question is, I said that it was probably the best 22 minutes of Gingrich's campaign. I'm not so sure where he goes from here, even in a debate like tonight.
I was going to say, like, what does that mean for him? I've taken up this hobby of defending the fringe candidates who are not actually crazy at all, and asking why he's allowed into things and they're not, because he has no path to the presidency whatsoever. I remember there was National Journal did one of its ordinal rankings of the candidates and had him in 9th place, and then had a special category of people who were just total losers. And there was nothing really different in the dialogue except just that Gingrich is better at talking and arguing than they are.
No, I think that's right. For instance, why is Gingrich always on Meet the Press? Because he makes for great television. Why is he always on the panel there? Why is he on Fox News? I think you're right in terms of the path to the nomination. His campaign's in disarray. He still has an enormous amount of campaign debt. But he's a character. And I think there's really no reason beyond that. And he's hit a few decent low numbers in a couple of national polls, but that's about it. But for what it was, he was pretty good in that format, I think.
Yeah, this is something I struggle with as I cover this stuff, because there's you and I both go back and forth between presidential politics and Congress and everything else, and I'm finding that presidential campaigns are really most useful as just a way to cover something that you wouldn't normally cover. A way to not even just to go to Columbia or Manchester or Alton Bay was where I last was. It's very scenic. I just mean there are things about the country and things voters will tell you and problems you learn about by covering these candidates. So, because if you're just being brutally analytical about it, only one of these guys will win, and then maybe one guy will be a vice presidential nominee, but everyone else is almost wasting your time. It's like if you covered, how to cover it. I guess people will write stories about all these candidates who might be drafted for a team, for like in the NFL or something. But at some level, I'm like, is Newt Gingrich really worth paying attention to? I mean, I'm in the Capitol now, and Alan West was giving a press conference about why he's going to show a 9/11 memories, the Families of 9/11 film, and I was like, why, why cover that? I mean, there's some of the stuff I wonder just how much of it is actually useful. But I mean, I'm going a little bit crazy because I feel like there are all these vast economic problems and all these interesting solutions or ideas that will not solve anything, and everything we're doing that's not covering that, I start to get a little bit bored with.
Well, you're bored with it, the other stuff, but the problem is for a lot of readers, for a lot of journalists especially, it is that shiny ball to follow. I mean, if you want to talk about the economy, Mitt Romney debuts in a whole electronic book, hundreds of pages on his economic plan. And in Columbia, South Carolina, he put in a very solid, stable performance. But no one really talked about it. But if you spoke to conservative grandees who were attending this event in South Carolina afterwards, they say Mitt Romney was the most serious, he was the best prepared, and on the economic questions, he was probably number one in that small forum. But no one really likes to talk about Romney too much. He's one of the front runners, and I think you're making a valid point, though, about what the media chases. But I still think there's something to be said for primary color, Dave, that covering the Thad McCotters of the world, and you've done this too. Gary Johnson.
I'll cover those guys. With that. Yeah, but I'm not. But I'm saying I'm trying to view the primary independent of what the polls show, and trying to. I mean, the thing about Gingrich is I don't think anything he says is that interesting. It's very well phrased, but he's a guy who's been writing books and going on TV shows and has pretty mainstream conservative views and theories of politics. But so does lots of former speakers of the House. Whereas Gary Johnson has this fundamental challenge to most of what the country believes. Buddy Roemer has this obsession with trade policy and campaign finance reform. McCotter is I think basically like a Chinaphobe. And I find those things kind of interesting. Those stories as ways to describe what's going on in the country. But no, there's also, Gingrich is more likely to say something that's a gaffe or whatever. And that is what people end up focusing on. It's just weird because I try to see as much of the stuff in person as possible. It's not just all influenced by what gets promoted in different media. But it's a little bit wears you down a little bit when you just see that the only thing that is guaranteed interest is somebody making some sort of a gaffe. Well, you were there. We probably discussed this in our Bowling Heads, but you were the guy Gingrich was talking to when he talked about how great Dinesh D'Souza's book was. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. It's not connected to ideology. It's just this pose where you can say, boy, I wish everyone would chill out and think about real solutions like I do. And I think he could try that and continue to win over these independents who just find the whole thing
I think he was weak in the first debate in Iowa. I don't think he had a theme that was caught on. I think the way he spoke, and this stuff shouldn't matter too much, but in the debate it does. We have limited time. I don't think he made much of an impression. I think he has to change up what he did in Iowa. You can't just play the soft game. If he has some of that tweet spirit where he call me crazy, or he's supposedly this motorcycle rider and rock nut, show some of that, because in this crowded field, he better have some kind of spark coming out of somewhere.
He does, Red. I mean, they have such a sense of what plays well. I mean, the last thing I saw Huntsman in New Hampshire, he talked to these, whenever he sees a biker, he makes a beeline for them, and then finds a way to ride their bike, and rides it around, and, as far as is polite, and then comes right back. I was talking to, one photographer afterward who was describing his complicated photo blending process he was trying to use to get all the action with a motorcycle. He knows how that works. I feel like the way he can distinguish himself, it doesn't always work. Like John Edwards did this in 2008. There's one debate, I think it was down to 3 of them. He didn't do it before that. There's one debate where Hillary and Obama went after each other, and he was like, what's with all the squabbling? We got real problems in this country. Is that your impression, Dave? I like it. It's my impression of I don't know, it's probably an impression of
you elite Delaware media, your Southern impressions.
But that's just the lower, slower Delaware accent. Although, that's one thing I like with covering the Northeast, is people seem to be able to tell that when I say wooder or roof or something, that I'm from Delaware. Because they actually know how to pronounce words up there. The grand slurring, the slur belt that goes from Wilmington through Baltimore or Balmer, where we just get too lazy to pronounce words correctly. People seem to know what that is.
As a Philadelphia guy, I know what you mean. Water ice, etc.
So I think this will be interesting. It's always good to have a new candidate come in, and the Politico MSNBC side of it. I mean, there's this risk, although they probably wouldn't be stupid enough to fight the last war, but there's a risk of just letting Gingrich go in there and bash the media.
I think he'd love to do it. He seems,
which is hilarious because he's on Meet the Press all the time. I mean, he's probably in the Meet the Press studio right now, just refilling coffee before he goes somewhere. The media loves him. He's just. I remember when it was in the dying days of the Hastert speakership, multiple kind of old school reporters and I shooting the breeze and then just reminiscing about how much fun it was to cover him. Reporters love him, and he just gets angry when we demand accountability about his failure to run an organization of any size. You don't want to give him openings to do that. I don't know, but this is where I'm thinking. I'm trying to suss through what everyone.
It's John Harris and Brian Williams, right? Who are moderating.
They'll be solid, yeah. I mean,
I wonder how they're going to handle, though, if Gingrich goes off the handle, if Gingrich really just starts slamming them and their gotcha questions.
I would love it if Brian Williams just say, with all due respect, you didn't seem to be this skeptical of Washington elites when you were, and then name like 10 Washington elite things he's done.
This would be a drinking game about certain Gingrich phrases. He reuses some of them that are just funny, profoundly. I know you have a whole...
he says, think about that.
Consider this.
Or,
yes.
think about it. It's. I think everyone. I just tweeted this to validate that Ad Age story. I tweeted this, and other reporters were just giving their own ones, like profoundly damaging. Other. But a lot of this is he'll say something and wait for the air to stop rustling, with everyone laughing at how good it was, and he'll say, think about this. Consider this. And just look at... He's like, look, you're not as smart as me, so I'm going to give you some time to come in. And it's like an entertaining show, but at the same time, he's really not that relevant. I can identify it. I think all this stuff comes from the fact that in 2007, I covered Ron Paul, because I had to, at reason. I had to and I wanted to, and it was fun. But I would cover Ron Paul, and no one else would show up at his press conferences, and if they did, they would just ask if he would endorse somebody or run as a third-party candidate or something, and no one gave a crap about his Federal Reserve position. So no one noticed that, he was coming up with a position which would then be adopted by the Republican Party after decades earlier they would regard as crankery. So that's what I was trying to say before, and should have said, so I wouldn't sound like an ass. Was it's not that everyone's covering the wrong stuff. It's just there's only one candidate going to win. Everyone else, I think, is interesting either as a way to tell us to look at something that's wrong with the country, or to find the next ideological thing that's going to bubble out. It's interesting when they talk about Sharia law. Where did that come from? Things like that. But it's like the horse race, and the guy said something untoward stuff that I get tired of. I give the guys a huge pass on that. If you say some words wrong.
No, I agree. That stuff that's a 24-hour or less story. But I think now that the field is real crowded for the first time, I'm really curious to see how Bachmann handles this. Is she finished as a candidate with her continually dipping poll numbers or not? And I know she went after Polenny, and I hear she doesn't want to go after Perry. But where does she fit now? How does this Romney-Perry race crack up? How does something shake this up? I know we've talked about Huntsman quite a bit, but is there anyone else out there? We've discounted Gingrich's possibility of rising, even though he says he'll rise by early next year. Kane, Paul openly admits that he's not really gunning for the nomination, more to change minds.
I think you probably need other people to jump into this. If I'm the Romney campaign, I'd find some way to entice Palin to run, because she doesn't present a threat to him any place where he needs to win. But all she can do is take another 10% of the Tea Party vote. I think she'd be less important than people think. Because you talk to voters, too. Don't you encounter a lot of Republican voters who like her, but just don't think that she can be president or win?
There's a lot of love for Palin. I spent over a week in Iowa in August, traveling around, meeting with people at diners, just Republican voters, and there's a real affection for her. But in terms of voting for her, I don't see a movement toward it. I spoke with a lot of her activists, but I don't think the movement's as big as they hoped it would be. Peter Singleton, the guy running things out there, is a nice gentleman, but I don't think he has the base that he envisioned when he started for this movement. But I think you're raising a good point that Romney needs Perry to be cut off in Iowa or struggle in Iowa. If Bachmann continues to fade and Perry is really killing it in every Iowa poll now, that's trouble for Romney, because we know how the media works. If Perry has a huge win in Iowa, he comes into New Hampshire, maybe doesn't beat Romney, but does very credibly, and then he goes into South Carolina where he's a huge favorite, 20 points up in the latest PPP poll. I think Romney's in real trouble. But if Perry knocked around in Iowa, it's a different story.
He had this great situation where a few candidates had to break out in Iowa and then rise from there. The reason, as soon as Perry was getting in, the reason I just assumed he was going to win the thing is because he has credibility in all the Southern primaries, which because Republicans, well, I think both parties reward states that vote more reliably for them. The South just has a ton of delegates, and if the election was held today with no organization, he would win every single Southern primary. I mean, Florida might be kind of a fight, and everything else he would destroy. And that's in both parties. Like, winning the South in a block is a pretty good way to lock the thing down. I mean, this is what Obama, with the African-American vote powering over. If you look, he lost all the big states, but he won the caucuses, and because of the black vote, he won just this outsized share of delegates in the Deep South. I think the whole thing. He lost Tennessee. Florida was a fluke. And he lost Arkansas. But other than that, it's just like a killing field. It always has been. Are you still there? Oh, I just started hearing beeping on the
I'm not sure what that is.
That's why if people see me looking over my shoulder, that's why. So that's why I assume if he doesn't screw up, this is the dream of a Southern candidate who has advantage in the Republican Party. He has something Bush didn't, which is somebody who's already expected to win New Hampshire. I mean, Romney has to win New Hampshire,
yes,
or we all just write him off. So, he's in such a commanding position. I mean, there was occasionally an article along the lines of, well, these polls 4 years ago showed Giuliani up by that much, and I said, and the thing is, Giuliani was a pro-choice, pro-gay, liberal Republican who was swinging right, who didn't have that credibility in the South. I mean, you can take Perry down based on the issues, but he's just not weak in the way that Giuliani was. And he's not, if you look at the name recognition, I mean, Rudy got into the race with like 70% approval with Republicans and universal name recognition. And Perry, they still don't quite know who he is. They just know there's this Southern governor who seems to
No, there's a cultural connection there. When I was in South Carolina, traveling around. Perry's a recent addition, and the way people are talking about him, I have a piece up on National Review Online today called Palmetto Perry, and how Perry's investing a lot of time, money, and effort in South Carolina. And when you speak to county chairs in South Carolina, Republicans are very interested in him. They like his evangelical spirit. They like his southern tinge conservatism. And that seems like a lot of surface things, but to a lot of these Republican leaders in South Carolina, and I'm sure in other southern states, that Perry's a Texan, that he speaks their language, he understands their issues. It matters, and they're still unhappy that Romney in 2007, 2008 especially, right when the primary was approaching, kind of gave up on South Carolina, didn't put as much effort in. There's not any movement towards Romney. John Huntsman has invested a lot of money in South Carolina, has hired some top operatives, but continues to struggle to catch on. And Ron Paul is making a strong play in South Carolina, even though that's not reflected in all the polls. There's a lot of support for him on the ground, at least vocal support. And so I could see Perry sweeping South Carolina. And so regardless of what happens in Iowa, even if he doesn't win Iowa, let's say if Bachman surges for some reason, and Romney wins New Hampshire, it's a firewall, and Perry can post South Carolina, and a huge double-digit win in South Carolina still is trouble for Romney. And that's why you see Romney going to Nevada to give his job speech. He's trying to make a more national play, seeing states beyond the Dixie area where he can really be a strong candidate. But I think South Carolina is really the keystone. I was glad I was there to see that Perry and his connection to the region is making the biggest boon for him, and that's going to be have a big impact.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be so foolish as to write the rest of the campaign from tonight. Because my not that we were going to, but what I always remember when I look at these debates is that in 2007, Hillary Clinton basically won every single debate, and the thing that made her weak enough for Obama to beat her was Chris Dodd asking a follow-up question about her position on driver's licenses for illegal immigrants. So now you need a certain thing, a number of things to, you need like a moon and a sun and an asteroid and all these things to be in the right alignment for this to happen. And in that case, there was this issue that has totally been forgotten. Like, no one talks about that anymore. that was hot buttoned to a part of the base, and there was an impression that she was this dissembler, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what it is for Perry, but, the Romney people right now they like the idea that Perry's a frontrunner who everyone's trying to take down. Obviously they do. It's a real change from 2007, where he was the guy, even when he wasn't really in the lead, he was the guy everyone hated and was beating up on. They like this position that he's the frontrunner, but it's not clear they're going to find or let some other candidate find a thing that'll bring him down. I mean, it might end up being, Ron Paul grinding Perry down on some kind of paleo-conservative
and
issue.
there's a little Texas hot blood there that these guys are from the same state, they know each other. That's a good point. I think your point about Romney Hayes is interesting.
They had this little spat yesterday, but you need something. It'll be totally random, but you need something just like to throw to the media that we devour like hyenas for 3 days.
Anything Perry, Ron Paul, it just brings Perry out there and forces him to talk about something that he wasn't probably going to speak about. It will be interesting. I think the Romney hate point, you don't sense it this cycle. No. And I've seen Romney behind the scenes before some of these debates, and he's very warm with Michelle Bachmann. He was the first to call her after her Ames win. He's very friendly with Herman Cain. That he's really trying to reach out to his competitors. I think Romney has learned, if anything, from last time, that he doesn't want to be in the spot where they're all picking on him. And so, from what I can tell from other campaigns, he is in active communication. He's not trying to be nefarious in how he's looking at their campaigns. Being very warm. Say what you want about that approach and what Romney's real intent is there, but I think he is making a calculation, and he just does not want to be in a position where everyone throws on him in the debate. We saw Huckabee and McCain and Giuliani do it last time with Glee, and you just don't see it that time, and I think that's a real positive for him. And maybe Michelle Bachmann and others are more nervous about Perry, and Romney, as we always say, continues to just move forward with a solid block.
I think one thing undergirding all this, though, is that as Obama continues to look really weak, even though he polls very well, if you follow the history of this presidential polling, a guy this weak is usually beatable. And if you're not totally simpatico with the base on ideology and there's stuff they don't like about you, they're not going to make excuses to vote for you. I remember Pawlenty had a line I saw him use a few times in Iowa before the straw poll, so like right before he dropped out, where he just called Obama a dead duck or dead in the water, and he was going to be beaten unless Republicans nominated a horrible candidate. And there's the supporters of Huntsman. I mean, when I was tailing him along, there were a few state legislators who supported him too, and they were, there was their argument was, oh well, we need to win independents to win this thing. We can't nominate an extremist. But the base doesn't really believe that, and nor should they, because Democrats in 2008 realized that was the year not to pick a safe Southern, well, not safe because John Edwards ended up being one of the, just a horrible human being behind the scenes, but not picking the super electable guy, but saying, oh, let's just throw a Hail Mary pass and nominate a black guy or woman. This is the only time when we can nominate a liberal black president because people hate Republicans so much, which was totally savvy. I remember Edwards had some ad that he ran, definitely on TV. I think it was in North Carolina or South Carolina. That just ran through poll numbers of how much better he was doing. I mean, he was up by 15 on McCain, and Hillary was up 8 or something. Didn't make sense because Democrats just realized anyone they nominated was going to win. They could have nominated Gravel and probably won. And that factor just all these things are coalescing for Perry. I mean, he has a dangerous book with a bunch of dangerous opinions. Yeah, and the unemployment's 9%, so who cares? I'll win anyway.
That's a great point. I think that book is not as much of an issue as the New York Times put it on the front page, and everyone else has covered it. I think most of the country's fed up. If you look at every poll about the economy. So this idea that Perry's anti-establishment, even though he's a career politician, that narrative, that theme is not going to be negative for him. And I think you're hitting on a point that's probably really there in a lot of these discussions, which is that Perry, and regardless of who the nominee is, it really comes down to what Obama does. And that Obama, and whenever you speak to Democrats, we're always trying to talk about the Tea Party and it's extreme and radical. Mm-hmm. But it comes down to unemployment, perhaps, and that all of these discussions about the primary are great and fun for us to do. But, for instance, his speech on Thursday for Obama, this is what matters for Obama, and whether he can have some kind of new strategy on the economy. I'm skeptical about the speech on Thursday, about whether it's going to accomplish anything. Maybe it's too late even for him on the economy. But this is the question. It's more about Obama. We're not trying to always talk about what Republican can beat him politically, because maybe in every poll Obama continues to struggle. I'm not sure that's going to change unless the economy changes.
No, I'm pretty skeptical of the speech, although the thing is, I need some political scientist to explain this, who's just studied the history of this. I just don't feel like presidential speech can matter as much as it used to, because if it used to be, there just weren't that many entertainment options besides it. It was hard, there weren't as many instant opinions about something. And also, the way a speech came to you was just much more single service. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt would give a speech, and the entire text would be in the newspaper. The text is available to anyone when the president gives a speech. And I noticed, I put it on the website. I put it Slate when I get the transcript, and people read it. But most people are going to devour this as a bunch of sound bites. And what often happens with speeches is that, the president gave a joint address to Congress about health care in 2009. What do you remember from that?
That's right. No.
You didn't answer my trick question correctly.
Okay.
He gave a speech about. No, he did. He did give a speech about health care. Do you remember any news from it? And if you don't, I'll mention my point, because this didn't work out.
I don't remember. I don't remember much, except he gave a series of many Obamacare speeches that I remember, but they all blur together.
The joint session of Congress speech. The news was Joe Wilson.
That's right.
The news was that Joe Wilson had said you lied. No one remembers anything else with that. And the same thing, because the reporters are looking for, everyone's looking for just something that'll define it that is not the text of the speech, and it's left to historians years later to compare the stuff. But the incident, I just don't think you can do that much with the speech. Now, because he gave something similar, it wasn't joint address of Congress, but he tried to pivot a year ago before the election to about, getting the math wrong, I wrote about it last week, but there was a package of hundreds of billions of dollars of tax cuts and spending that would be pro-jobs, according to the White House. And no one remembers it. So this speech, I'm already expecting no one to remember what he actually proposes.
I think you're right. So what's the White House game here? If Obama's greatest thing is to give a speech, to get attention for his policies, and that's not going to catch on, maybe it never did, I don't see how he solves the economic, how he starts to have a new policy in the economy without a new speech, some kind of fresh message. I don't discount the White House for trying to do something. I just don't see how anything works now. Because you're right. Even if he has a great grand program, it'll be Jim DeMint walked out, or someone else didn't attend, or there was an incident, perhaps. That's the story.
Yeah, that story's been crazy because it's three guys, one of whom has already not attended the speech in the past, who have said they're not attending. So we're talking about 3 of 535 people who are not attending this thing, and they get all the attention in the run-up. There's a few things. There are some ideas that, the infrastructure bank and some tax cuts. There's the promise of the super committee. I think the only way the president could wrest something away from this is the thing that he does do. He always does talk about sacrifice generally. He always has some inspiring rhetoric generally, but he doesn't tell a story of why a problem happened, or he doesn't. I guess Drew Weston wrote about this in his New York Times op-ed that every liberal Clifton saved. But he doesn't tell a story about who's responsible. Now, I don't, probably unheard of and not a good idea for the president to give a joint address to Congress and talk about how Congress, the Republicans in Congress are ruining everything. So I don't think he can do that. But, he has missed the opportunity to tell, long stories about how employment works, and not how employment works, people know that, less than they used to. What the meaning of the deficit is, there are complicated economic things that they, like Republicans, boil down to homilies about balancing the budget. Your family lives under its means, so should we. if they wanted to use this speech, it might be their last attempt to explain why the economy is broken. Not just say, oh, I'm going to pass some stuff because we won't pay attention. But, like, explain why stuff's broken, explain what they did wrong over the last year and a half. I mean, I would go for things like, I thought the auto bailout mostly worked, but they didn't get enough concessions from unions. There are buttons you can push.
No, I think you're
tell that story, and you please liberals, and I would say also criticize. Yeah, mea culpa, I would say, but one that's more. You don't even have to him. It just must. He could criticize. He could praise some decisions Republicans have made, criticize a couple that Democrats have made, but wend in this story about why things are so rotten in the first place. And
he's got to be careful though. He does a Jimmy Carter type Les speech. You never know. That could be the theme.
Although that speech, actually, his approval bounced 10 points after that speech. Everyone forgets. But I think you can only pull that card.
Or maybe it's time for Obama to bring in Jack Adele. Who knows? But,
or Henrik Hertzberg or someone else who, I forget who tried to veto that. But I don't know. What do you think? We should probably wrap up and do work after this. But what do you think he needs to do?
I think you hit a nail on the head that pointing fingers at Republicans by the White House has become such a continuing theme by this president that I think doing something a little different would not only be fresh, but I think the media and fellow reporters would find it very intriguing. And if Obama, in some ways, even if he doesn't do it really, takes responsibility for the economy or talks about employment in a way that it's reflective that he has not performed as well as he should, and almost try to hit bottom, and even if it's on the surface, and say, look, it's not working out, here's my strategy to move forward. I think that would get a lot of sympathetic press, and it'd be provocative because it put Republicans in the position of trying to work with the president instead of just saying, there he goes again, he's not taking responsibility, he's not working with us. And so I think as much as we want to discount maybe the optics of the speech, it's right before football, it's not going to change the economy overnight. I think this speech will say a lot about his presidency moving forward in the next few months, especially as the primary unfolds. Because where does Obama stand? We all know the primary candidates are beating up on him every day on the economy. But what is this White House strategy between now and the end of the primaries to deflect all this constant criticism coming from the right? Does he not only have an agenda and a policy plan, but politically, I think I'm going to be really trying to watch this about how he handles his situation right now. Not only the low poll numbers, but the continual low employment. And is this a guy who fights? I know liberals are always asking him to fight, but I think that's a valid question right now, 3 years into his presidency. Is he the kind of guy who's going to take blame, give blame, a little bit of both? Is he a warrior? Is he trying to come forward as peacemaker? I think that's going to be interesting to watch for sure.
I don't know. I think everything you said, and I think if he mentioned a few appointments he wants to make, just say there's this many unconfirmed seats in the Fed, there's this many unconfirmed jobs for this, there's this many for this. He has the ability to elevate some stuff that doesn't get covered, so maybe he could do that. And they probably won't. I mean, they've been weirdly bad at explaining why Congress actually works, I think, because they just don't want to look partisan and whiny, then they end up looking partisan and whiny and just a petty way.
And I hope it's not just stories about John Smith in Iowa and Mark Thomas in South Carolina. I mean, that I think is just that'd be a disappointment to both sides. We've heard that a million times from everybody. And just real quick, I don't think I got many clues about President Obama's speech from his Detroit address on Labor Day and other Labor Day weekend speeches. I'm just not sure. I think this is going to be kind of a surprise.
I think you're right. Well, I'm going to let you go, and we'll both try to figure out as much as we can about what will actually happen. But it was good talking to you. I'll see you next. Some part of America that's got presidential candidates.
Look forward to it. We'll look for John Huntsman and his motorcycle. Okay.
No, check it out. Thanks.